Okay, in this homework assignment, we're going to create items, allow nodes to contain items, and create a player class so that the player can have items, and then create enough methods so that the player can drop items and pick items up. In the future, we'll worry about how to make the items have more substance to them. Right now, they're just kind of like inert things that sit in rooms. Before we start making our player class and our item class, let's do a little refactoring. So inside graph, I want to rename node to room. So you can do that. I've already done that here, but you can do that by selecting node, hitting Alt-Shift-R to refactor. You can type room instead of node, and then hit enter, and that should refactor everything. Up here, let's rename graph to be level. So put your cursor inside graph, hit Alt-Shift-R, and type level. Now we've got to do a lot more refactoring because all of our method names are a little bit wrong. So again, let's hit Alt-Shift-R for every single one of these. So instead of add node, now we're saying add room. Here, instead of add node, I'm going to say add room. I guess we can... It's a little weird to say add directed edge. Maybe it's better to say, like, add directed passage or something. Because the idea is it's a passage from one room to another room. Or add directed door. Maybe I'll say door. Door is a little bit misleading because they're not necessarily doors. They could be passages. So add two-way door. So maybe instead of directed door, I'll say one-way door. One-way door and two-way door. That makes more sense. Okay, get node, I'm going to rename to get room. Oops. Save graph, I'm going to rename to save level. Load graph, I'm going to rename to load level. Okay, it's already called room. Neighbors seems fine. Room seems fine. So add neighbor. I think that's fine. Get neighbor's fine. Get name's fine. Get neighbor names is fine. Get description, set description. Okay, so I think that's all the refactoring we need to do. So if we're going to implement items, we'll need an item class. So let's go ahead and create an item class. And I want you to give items the following properties. An item should have a name and a description, and that's all. Don't forget to make your fields private. You should add a constructor. You should add getter and setter methods for all the fields. All right, so that's item. Right now we have a sort of a player. I mean, you can wander around the rooms, so in that sense there's a player. But the only thing that we save about the player right now is the room that they're in. That's inside main, that's this current variable. So it's the current room the player is in. So we don't actually have a player object, but if we want the player to be able to like pick up items and have items, I think maybe it's time to make an actual player class. So I'm going to make a class called player. And the player needs the following fields. The player needs a current room that they're in. The player probably should have a name. And the player should have a list of items that they carry. And this is like really a list, like an array list of item objects that they're carrying. If you want to add a description to your player, that might be nice. You'll need a constructor. You'll need... We'll need getter and setter methods, but instead of just auto-generating all the getters and setters, let's think more carefully about what do we actually want to do with the player. So we should have a way of moving the player. So we'll want probably a move method that takes maybe another room as an input, or possibly a string that's a room name as an input, or maybe both. I think that we'll want... like standard getter and setter methods for name and description. I think that we will want, let's see, if we've got items, we've got to have a way to give player item, so it should take an item as an input, so it's a way of like handing an item to a player, and remove, maybe instead of give player item, we should call it take item, because it's like from the perspective of the player. Think about how we'll use it. We'll say like player.take item. And so instead of remove item, maybe we'll say drop item. Drop item, giving an item as an input is maybe a little bit weird. Maybe we should give it a string that's like the item name. So now we have a way of getting items and dropping items. We probably want something that returns a string called item list or carrying item list or something like that, that will return what items are we carrying right now. Alright, so that sounds good for player. What else do we need? So now the only thing we need is to provide rooms a way of holding items. So let's go into level, and inside level, remember we have this inner class called room. So same thing here. I think we want to provide a list of item objects, and then you need a couple of methods. You'll need a method called add item, where you can give an item to a room, and remove item. And this time maybe it's best to have an item name as an input. Of course it should return the item itself, or null if the item doesn't exist. And it should have a similar thing where like it displays what items it has. So get item list display, or like, I don't know, you can call that whatever you want to call it. Alright, I think that's everything we're going to need. Let's think. So we can add items to rooms, that makes sense. The player can wander around. We have a way for the rooms to tell us what items are in there. We have a way of having the player pick up items. When a player picks up an item, obviously we want to remove it from the room and then add it to the player, and vice versa. When the player when the player drops an item, we want to remove it from player and add it back to the room, something like that. So the last things that we're going to add in here are the following. We will add a new command called take, and then they'll give it an item name. And what this command does is, if the room contains that item, it should remove the item from the room and add it to the player, and then it should display a message saying they took the item. We should have a new command called drop. So if the player is carrying an item with the right name, they'll drop it. In other words, remove the item from the player and add it to the room. What else? I guess we need to modify the look command so that it also displays the items in the room, so that the player knows what it is that they can try and take. Alright, I think that covers it all. It's a goodly chunk of programming. I wish you guys luck. I forgot the most important thing. The most important thing is we need to be able to support movement. Remember, we have this whole move method. So modify the go command. When the player moves, we need two things to happen. We need the current room inside player needs to change. Oh, maybe that's the only thing that needs to change. Right, because rooms don't know if a player's inside it or not. So we don't have to let the room know that the player is no longer there. Okay, so actually that's not such a big deal.